On today's World Insight, economic rebound from the Golden Week break, steady recovery after the holiday boom.
People are confident about their security, about their safety.
It's a steady and big step forward.
And China's most spectacular sights captured through the lens of an American environmental photographer. The motivation and inspiration for natural beauty in the words of the lensman himself.
China has places at least as beautiful as America or Russia or Europe. You know, it has the Xinjiang, like Grand Canyon, you know, in China.
Yeah.
And
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin today's program with the Golden Week, the 8th-day holiday in China. This year, the National Day and Mid-Autumn Festival coincide on October the 1st. This year, the enthusiasm of Chinese people even surpassed their feelings during the Spring Festival due to the severe situation of COVID-19 pandemic back then. Now, with the situation well under control so far in China, we see notable sites and resorts all over the country embracing visitors from afar and wide. Data till the 7th shows that China has seen more than 10 million rail trips every day since National Day on October the 1st. That came as many people took advantage of the efficiency of high-speed railways to enjoy day trips close to home. Meanwhile, the highway has also been a popular option, with nearly 5 million road trips on average every day over the holiday. Meanwhile, the country's consumer spending has recovered, witnessing a hike since the outbreak of the coronavirus. Does Golden Week consumer spending able to help China put its best foot forward? Let's loop in our panelists. For National Holiday and the Chinese economy, in Bangkok, Professor Jeffrey Towson, Guanghua School of Management with Peking University, has been a keen observer of the Chinese economy for years. In Beijing, Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from International Business and Economics University. Welcome to both of you, professors. 45 billion yuan. That has already been spent over the past 7 days since the National Day holiday began. This is the latest number we have got. Meanwhile, 600 million tourists traveling on the National Day holiday. That's amazing numbers. Professor Liu, briefly.
Well, we can see that the situation with the mixed feeding. Now the traffic jam in the tourist parks, etc., are really annoying. But in the meantime, the broader picture shows that Chinese economy has almost recovered, and life becomes so normal that half of the nation are really traveling. It's sort of a rebellious behavior because people has been caged for the last almost half a year, and now it is really time. And more is that people are confident about their security, about their safety, and now everything becomes normal.
I see. Mr. Towson, though, when we talk about China's economy almost recovered, what are some of the main key factors we really need to look at the numbers before we reach that conclusion?
Well, I think there's the overall numbers. How big is Chinese tourism? And we're not at the level we were last year, even with, there's a lot of sort of outbound tourism being converted into inbound tourism because people aren't flying to, say, Bangkok like they would have last year.
No.
So we're getting a bit of a bump in that regard domestically. But even then, the numbers aren't what they were last year. But, I mean, who's comparing this year to last year? I mean, it's a steady and big step forward in terms of let's get back to life, let's get the tourism industry, which has been really hit very hard. Let's get those companies back on their feet, hotels, tour operators, attractions, restaurants. So I think, really across the board, big step forward. And, this is the way you get back. So in the right direction, I think.
Though there are differences in the way people are spending and also in how facilities are being offering, services are being offered also. For example, parks, national parks these days are still having only 75% of the original number they could have because of being cautious for health reasons. And people need to book their tickets mainly 1 day ahead, though they usually would have a ticket anyway. Meanwhile, we also see tourists quite cautious, still wearing masks if you go to these places, particularly here in Beijing, very cautious still. And that becomes almost a part of the habit. So how do you see COVID-19 is having its impact, both psychological and certainly economically, on the Chinese consumers, Professor Liu?
Definitely, that's going to have large impact on the lifestyle and also on the work habit of the people. One is that people are shifting more online, and even if the COVID-19 disappears, the reliance and the confidence in online information and online service will be there and will be consolidated. And the other is that the logistics, in terms of the provision and the delivery service will be there and continue to be very strong.
Mr. Townsend, China has been talking about two circulations, so-called double circulations of its economy, internal circulations mainly within the country, and also external circulations that has been always functioning over the past decades with the rest of the world. Now, it seems that the internal one is working as it should be, but how much will it be able to become the engine of the economy? And how do you see the relations between the so-called internal and the external?
I mean, it depends if we're talking about, let's say, services or products. If we're talking about products, well, things are still coming out of Chinese factories. They're going on ships. They're going out to the world. So that external part is, moving along as you'd expect, and the export numbers look fairly good.
And imports, too. There are ships that are coming
in
with all kinds of products coming from all over the world as well.
Right, but when we start talking about services, well, services by definition are sort of person to person, right? That's kind of what services are. So healthcare, tourism, education. Okay, we're seeing some pretty big changes here. How many Chinese students are going to some university in Europe this year versus last year? How many foreign tourists are coming into China right now? Not very many. So really, I think what we're seeing is on the dual circulation question, some sectors are just going to be going down because people aren't getting on planes this year. But I also think we're probably going to see some adaptation. Education, you can kind of move that online. Domestic tourism has bumped up because outbound tourism has kind of dropped. So I mean, we're going to see a sort of a shifting pattern there. But generally speaking, people are doing a lot less stuff in person than they did a year ago. So services are probably going to take a hit. But China is lucky in that it's a big enough country that the domestic market is significant, and that's not what most countries have.
How much space is there, Professor Liu, for the so-called domestic circulation? Well, that's only a terminology being invented recently. That has always been the logic of any economy, isn't it? You have the interactions among different localities in China, different sectors in the country. You also have interactions between the country and also the rest of the world. That's the logic for every economy. But just right now, people raise that terminology because the so-called internal circulation is supposed to give more confidence to the overall economic picture. Professor Liu, though, how much space is there?
Well, if we talk about domestic circulation, we have two focuses. One is the consumption side, the other is innovation side. In terms of consumption, Chinese savings rate is roughly at 38%. So there's still a potential. But we have to be careful in that, people save for good reason, not because they do not really want to spend on the luxury and more durable products, but they save for children education, for their retirement, etc., etc. So in order to boost the Chinese consumption power, and there has to be further confidence that needs to be injected into consumers by providing a better social welfare belt and by providing better access of medical service and education. And the other is innovation. So I do not think that it is really cost effective simply say of concentrating on indigenous innovation, although it is very important. So we still need to work collaboratively with the rest of the world and take on the basic science and work with those willing labs, etc. So overall, I could see that this concept of youth circulation has been projecting very mixed messages. So I hope the Chinese government can really clarify the situation. It is not that China is going to close the door against the world. It is the reality at the moment, but we continue to drive on a globalization basis, and this is where we have benefited for the last 4 decades.
Professor Townsend, how about those points? Meanwhile, how do you see that the economy be able to generate enough energy within itself, while at the same time keep on reaffirming with the idea of reform and opening up?
Yeah, I mean, you can't look at China, even though it does have a large domestic market now, you can't look at the history without, seeing that this had a lot to do with the engagement with the world, the exports, the foreign direct investment. That was incredibly important for a good 20 years, less important now, obviously. And so that's a huge part of this situation, and I mean, we're seeing that change. We're seeing it between China and the U.S., we're seeing it between multiple countries. It's not clear where it's going. I think we're just seeing a sort of a resetting, that maybe the situation going forward, the international aspect of China as it relates to, say, the U.S., where I'm from, it won't be the same as it was for the last 20 years.
It is still a very...
Perhaps in some sense that's normal, but in obviously things are a lot more tense than they were 5 years ago. So yeah, I mean, this is shifting almost on a weekly basis now, depending what comes out of the White House.
Very interesting what you have just said. It's really a fluid picture, which means it is a test of adaptability and flexibility of economies, isn't it, Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, one of the things I do like about both China and the U.S. actually is both countries are fairly adaptable. When things happen, they change, and that's actually not that common in a lot of countries. A lot of countries get stuck. But China and the U.S. really do have that in their populations, in their governments, and their policies. So I think we're going to see things very different, say, 5 years from now than what we've seen. But it's going to take some time and a little bit of probably turmoil.
We have already seen 6% growth, of course, based on earlier very low growth rate. So, Professor Liu, it is a big question whether China will be able to maintain that growth rate and probably even higher. And by the end of the year, whether there could be a dreamlike 6% growth rate of GDP compared to last year, as that was the goal being set earlier, of course, without the knowledge of there could be COVID-19. Or lower, but to what extent? Numbers is not everything, but numbers do matter. So, Professor Liu.
Yeah, the second quarter we achieved 3.2, and now the third quarter almost 6%. So this is really a very good news that can inject confidence into manufacturer and into consumer, and also that the confidence can also be provided to all the stakeholders along the supply chain that are associated with China. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, that our figures do not really tell everything because right now we still are in the stage of rehabilitation rather than expansion. And right now, the PMI are finally in the expansion stage, but it still needs to be stabilized.
Not only the China picture, but overall picture of the world. We have seen, Professor Towson, the worst poverty rise might be since 1998, warns the World Bank. That is the latest coming out. And what does that mean for the Chinese economy? What will be the engine of the growth rate of the world? And how will China, in this prospect, being impacted and having its impact? That's a profound question, I know, but I do want to have your input.
I think businesses, government, families, it's almost like we have two modes. We have sort of ambition mode where we want to thrive, and then we have survival mode. And I think a lot of what a lot of us are doing, everyone's just trying to get through this year right now. I think most businesses have been stuck in that for the last several months, which is the right move. I think there's this question of, are we going to shift back to the normal that we had last year, or are we going to learn to live with this thing? Because viruses come up all the time. I mean, the flu comes around every year, and maybe we're just going to get really good at managing this thing.
Getting through 2020, Professor Liu, what do you think, as an economist, will be the best option for the rest of the year?
Safety is still the looming consideration, and now the security also becomes a great reason, but in the meantime misused the conception for further lockdown against the rest of the world. So now it is really a big test for those politicians because we do see a very divergent policy approach. One is that countries are being extra cautious to continue to maintain the lockdown, which makes the nation safer but less efficient. But there are nations that are concentrating on the reopening of the economy, return of the productivity, and that may bring up a higher exposure to personal safety. So this is going to be a very blurring picture with a lot of ambiguity.
There are a lot of ambiguities, and that's why some of the short-term plan could be very important. Professor Towson, meanwhile, we have seen the debate about what to do with the packages for every American inside the United States have been a political battle so far. I'm mentioning this not because it will have a direct impact on China's economy, but rather it will have a huge impact about how the U.S. will deal with its own financial situation and how the U.S. dollar, the value of it, will likely be in the future, and where does the money come from, and also, as a result, how the U.S. will deal with the other economies, including that of China. So, Professor Towson, I know, once again, it's a loaded question, but this is another important one.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is kind of trying to get its own house in order. Obviously, some states like California are in pretty bad shape. Others are doing better. And then, of course, the two political parties are fighting because that's what they do. And there's an election coming up, so everything becomes about that. So, yeah, the U.S. has a special role in banking and in currency globally. And the fiscal policies coming out of the U.S. don't strike, I think, anyone as particularly prudent, especially this year where the spending has really come off and spiked, major deficits this year. Yeah, I think I think a lot of the world's currency holders are going to be looking closely at what the U.S. does with the dollar. And this, I'm not an economist, but it doesn't look particularly assuring in general.
This is a stress test time, certainly. It has been continuing for some time for all economies. That includes China's and certainly include that of the United States. For now, we want to thank both of you for sharing your insights. Jeffrey Towson, Liu Baocheng, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And you're watching World Insight. Coming up on our program, Into the Wild in China, the roads less taken. seen through the lens of a nature and wildlife photographer. Why do these images matter? Kyle Oberman, an American with a lot of China experience, has the answer right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. This year's national holiday sees millions of tourists in China rushing to beautiful scenes and corners in this country to embrace the nature and the wild. Amazing pictures remind me of Kyle Oberman, a Mandarin and English-speaking environmental photographer based in Chengdu, China. Now, though, he is in Texas with his family. His photography specializes in telling the human story behind conservation. These pictures highlight the work and lives of forest rangers protecting nature reserves, national parks, and wetlands. Over the years, Oberman has stayed in China, allowed him to explore so much of what is unexpected, unseen, and unknown about this country to the rest of the world. He's seen so much more than any research engine or news media can deliver. But due to the global pandemic, he's stranded at home in the U.S. and unable to continue his exploration of nature for the time being. Earlier, I caught up with him, though, to find out more about his stories exploring China and his experience of social distancing in his Austin home. And now I'm joined from Austin, Texas by Kyle Oberman, environmental and adventure photographer. Kyle, good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good
I'm
to
waving.
finally hear your voice again.
I really wish to see you here in China, but apparently you were stranded inside Austin, Texas.
Yeah, no hot pot, but I'm doing my best to, to survive.
What do you mean by doing your best? Tell me more about how you spend your day, as an explorer, staying at home.
Yeah, I never thought that when I was 28 I would move back in with my parents, but yeah, that's kind of been the situation over here. So I'm at my mom, my dad's house in Austin. It's where I grew up. So I have a lot of high school friends, but I don't get to see them either, so it's too bad. So every day, I basically stay at home. I do work remotely. I'm catching up on a lot of video editing projects and photo editing and writing that I haven't had time to do, which is actually a good thing and a positive thing. It's giving me time to do that. And then I'm also doing some more time with my hobbies, like running and reading. And now I've even done some painting, actually, some painting of maps of China as well. So, just trying to stay busy and find unique ways to keep engaged.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm sure you missed the wilderness. I mean, you've been trying to present to the rest of the world something about China that a lot of people have never seen, the wild China. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I've been in China for 5 years, over 5 years now. And, when I first got to China, I was blown away by the nature that I saw, both in my Chinese friends' photography and when I started hiking. And I realized that there wasn't a narrative about, Chinese natural beauty or wilderness that was being told in the United States, when in reality, at least half of China is very, very wild, with very, very little people living in it. And so for me, that became a narrative that wasn't being told. And, I made it kind of my mission to tell it, and not just to, show people beautiful pictures, but also to help inspire people to realize that these places need to be enjoyed and protected and preserved and valued.
Right.
And China has places at least as beautiful as America or Russia or Europe. It has the Xinjiang, like Grand Canyon, in China.
Yeah.
And the, Himalayas. So it's just beautiful.
I have mouth-watering when you talk about all of these sceneries, because I've been staying in Beijing for the past 4 months. I can't move because of the, the COVID-19, but maybe you can help us to go through some of the places you just mentioned. Let's start it from the Gongga Mountain you told me many times about, where you started your wilderness exploration in China.
Yeah, so the Gongga Mountain, that is the highest mountain in Sichuan, and it's one of the highest mountains in the world outside of the Himalaya and the Karakoram. So it's a very, very special mountain just because it's so prominent, and it's very far away from the other big peaks of the world. And it's kind of a special meaning for me because that was the first mountain that I hiked around in China. And when I was a student at Peking University, I skipped class to go do it, but I told my professor, and she was okay with it. I was lucky to get away with it, but she knew that my dream was to go take these photos and experience China in that way, and she actually let me go. So I'm very indebted to her as a teacher.
Why is it, the wilderness? I mean, you have wilderness everywhere. Why wilderness in China that is so special to you? You had asthma the first time you came to China.
Yeah.
You couldn't bear with the smog, but you came back 1 year later, totally, in a way, amazed by the sceneries and also the wilderness. Tell me more about that.
I did get asthma from trying to run in Beijing when I was there, in my first time, and that was 6 years or so ago, 7 years ago. So it was much worse back then. And then I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated. But that's when I came back, and I did realize that there is this other side, like Western Sichuan or Qinghai. And then I got frustrated because I realized that, I only thought that China was Beijing. And, in the news, I only thought that China had bad air. But I realized, no, that's not, that's not the truth, right? There is some of it. It is in some of the big cities. But as soon as you start going outside, even out of Beijing, into the Taihang Mountains outside of Beijing, you have incredible fall colors like the northeast United States. You have the Chinese northern leopard habitat on Hebei, and at the border of Beijing. There's leopards, I think people don't know this, but it's when you think about it, it blows your mind. Like there are leopards outside of Beijing, and that's their historical habitat. So these stories, I just think it's more of like storytelling justice in a way. It's more just trying to balance the equation of this is also there, and not only is it very beautiful, but there are local Chinese people protecting these places. And for me, that is also an incredibly valuable undertold story.
Right.
There are locals in these villages, and they're giving their lives to protect these amazing wilderness areas. If we didn't have them, they are the first line of protection.
The Hengduan Mountain is your favorite. You even promised me once we were having coffee in downtown Beijing that you're going to take me to one of those, wonderful places in Hengduan Mountain. Tell us more about that. I want to have maybe a huge team following you next time.
Yes, well, you're welcome to come. The Hengduan Mountains, I think, is special for many reasons. One, it's a biodiversity hotspot, both for China but the entire world. And for example, the concentration of mammals and bird life is incredible.
这是中国的横断山脉，它们横跨整个江苏的东部。
It's also the only place in the world where pandas and snow leopards share the exact same habitat. So on the exact same trail, you might have a camera. In fact, in Wolong Nature Reserve, they've taken pictures of a snow leopard and a panda going through the exact same spot at a different time. So the biodiversity is the only type of it in the entire world. So that's very unique. And then I think just the natural beauty of the Hengduan speaks for itself in the pictures and images. But because of the natural beauty and the biodiversity, you have, I think, a really growing movement of local conservation groups and peoples that are centered around the Hengduan, from the south in the Galdigo Mountains, where there are gibbons, and I think 700 species to 500 species of birds, to the Giant Panda National Park, which is mostly in the Hengduan Mountains.
You talk about conservation. This is what you've been doing besides being a natural life explorer and also photographer. You've been trying to running mini marathon or ultra marathon, shall I say, while at the same time trying to do some conservation work. How you manage to put all of these ideas together? Is it possible?
Well, it's I think it's only as possible as you keep on trying to do. But I think for me, I've always thought of as photography or conservation as its value as in not just how beautiful a picture is, but how it's used. I think you can take an amazing photo, but if it's not seen or used, then I don't think it has much value in that sense. So for me, as a photographer, I'm thinking of, okay, I've taken these photos now, can I just give them to the NGO? Maybe they don't have a budget to pay for the photos, but how can I maybe partner with a Chinese corporation and do corporate social responsibility with them for them to support me, for me to basically freely support an NGO that may not have the budget to have the video or the photography. So that's one aspect of, opening up resources to groups that may not have them. And the ultra marathons, I last year I achieved the fastest known time around an ultra marathon around the Minyakonka route, which is a 5-day hiking route. Thanks. Yeah, it was amazing. It was a 5-day hiking route, and I did it in a little over 10 hours running. So the whole way I was picking up trash, and for me, I wasn't trying to highlight how much trash there was. I was trying to highlight the fact that we had the ability to do something about it. If you're gonna hike it in 5 days with a horse team, you can pick up some trash too. Because if I can run it and pick up trash and carry it on my back running in a day, we can all pick up a couple pieces when we're hiking. So and that was actually quite well received by a lot of locals and hikers, and it was really encouraging.
It's amazing what you've been trying to do, but at the same time, in some of the articles you wrote a few years earlier, I noticed a sense of frustration in a way that why people only go there for exploration, for appreciation of the beauty without really trying to conserve the nature, to protect the nature. You've been asking once and again, very loudly, in fact, clearly in those articles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, connecting the dots between communities, especially the outdoors community and the conservation community. I actually gave a TEDx in Chengdu last summer about this topic.
Yes.
I think you need to focus on an audience when you're talking about conservation. Focus on, don't just try to talk to the masses. Focus on business people or the outdoors community, and that's what I'm focusing on. Because we're the people who are outside the most. We are enjoying the outside. It's our hobby. It's our sense of freedom. So it only makes sense to try to preserve it for the next generation, right? If we enjoy climbing glaciers, on mountains or seeing them, then we should be the ones leading the fight to cut down our personal, carbon footprint, because we want our next generation to have the same resource. We want the next generation to be able to enjoy the same campsite trash-free. I think the biggest responsibility is on the people who are enjoying it, and we also have the responsibility to support the locals. The locals, they're outside even more than we are, and I don't think we see them or include them in our outdoor community. But I think it's time that we do see them as part of our community, and we support them how we can, whether it's awareness or funding or safety training, etc.
You should tell me more about the locals, because you've been telling me stories about two gentlemen you met. One is in Gongga Mountain, who has been spending his very small amount of income on building, very traditional trash treatment facilities around different places in Gongga Mountain. Another is a gentleman in Hengduan Mountain who you followed in order to explore the mountain. Tell me more about them and how you interacted with them.
Yeah, so Pachu is the first one, and he is native Tibet. He's a Tibetan, so he lives in Kangding in Sichuan. And he's actually a manager of a hostel. And yeah, so he uses part of his, profit from the hostel to build, basically stone trash collection pits on the campsites around this trail. And also, he has used his money to organize, trash pickups where they actually take in horse teams to, collect and pick up the trash from horses and bring them back out to a massive, 18-wheel truck where they can put it in bags on the bed of the truck. And it's a very inspiring story, but it's not an isolated incident. There are other some group of Chinese photographers from Chengdu, and they do the same thing in other parts of that area. They organize. They guide tours in that area for photography, but sometimes they will just guide people just to pick up trash from some of those beautiful photography sites.
Hengduan Mountain, how about that? Because you were following a local team, right, to explore the mountain, and you saw how they use their limited resources, and yet in a very efficient way try to conserve the nature. Tell me more about that. Everything you tell is so fresh to me. I want to hear all of this.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can come too. But I think one of the most special places to me, there's a couple. I mean, I've been to a lot of places in Hong Kong, but I think one of them is in the Gaoligong Mountains in Yunnan, and that is the southern tip of the Hong Kong Mountains. And there are a couple rangers there. One is named Tai Zhihong, and he is about, he's not 50, but he's approaching 50 years old, and he's been working as a forest ranger for 25 years. When he first started, he was making around 200 renminbi per month, which is hard for us to imagine now. And but he has basically been doing it out of a commitment and love for his mountains. And now I think he makes around 2,000 renminbi a month, which is still, in Beijing standards, that's not rent for a lot of people. But he's doing it in one of the most biodiverse areas of China, and he spends about 25 to 28 days a month living on the mountain with no cell phone service, in kind of a constructed wooden cabin. And every day he goes out to prevent poaching and to study the wildlife, primarily being the Skywalker gibbon, which was only discovered as a new species in 2017. And he works with scientists from Sun Yat-sen University in Guangdong to study the gibbon and be their guide, and also make sure that its livelihood is protected. So, and he actually just won an award. Last year he won an award, the Forest Ranger of the Year award by the Paradise Foundation.
Yeah.
And he got it from Jack Ma. Jack Ma gave him the award. It was pretty cool.
Kyle, I've always wondered from the very beginning, what inspired you to go along this road? I mean, you are well educated. You are not like a rich kid and you can do whatever you want. You try to make a very simple living by being a nature explorer, a photographer. I don't even know how you survive now, staying at home for that many months, without doing your work. So what really drives you all the time to be able to do all of this? I think it's amazing.
I think it's just, I measure, I guess, my value as the impact I make, not the money I make. And for me, I think I'm very lucky. I think I found a life mission quite early on. And for me, that life mission is to both change people's perspectives about Chinese nature and wilderness, and then to do everything I can to support the locals who are protecting it, because I don't see the locals getting the attention or the resources that they could use. I think 2,000 renminbi a month is not enough, and I'd like to see more corporations, more people supporting them and their work.
This is COVID-19. We're still in the middle of it. We don't know much about this virus. There might be coming back. In the United States, the number is still rising. So this gives a lot of thoughts for all of us about what kind of life we want and what's important about life. Your thoughts? For me, on a broader term, I hope it really gives people a wake-up call to show the power of nature, and how we need to prepare for it and respect it. Maybe that can give us a glimpse for the future, that if we as humans work together more and reduce our impact on the earth, we can have a much better future and to live harmoniously with nature. So I think that's my personal hope
for all of this. And then personally, for my lifestyle, I think it just shows how short, time is sometimes. And, I think we have to value where we are when we are, because we don't know when things will change. I think, not taking for granted my lifestyle, I won't take it for granted when I go back. I'll see how special it is now, because you never know when things will, may turn out to make things more difficult.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.